The old floorboards creaked beneath Evelyn Ashworth's boots as she pushed open the attic door of her late grandmother's cottage in Surrey. Dust swirled in the golden beam of afternoon sun that slanted through the small round window. It had been nearly a year since she'd last set foot in this place, and yet it felt frozen in time, like the old woman could walk in at any moment and scold her for tracking mud onto the rug. Evelyn brushed a lock of auburn hair behind her ear, her breath catching at the scent of lavender and old books. She'd come back to clear out the house, sell it, and return to her flat in London. That was the plan. Efficient. Emotionless. Quick. But plans rarely survive memories. A rusted tin box, tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt, caught her attention. It looked ordinary enough, dented at the corner, one hinge missing. But when she pried it open, the scent of pressed flowers escaped, and with it, a whisper from the past. Inside were letters. Dozens. Yellowed, handwritten, and tied with a faded blue ribbon. The top one bore her name in an elegant, looping script. Evelyn. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. If you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. There are things you must know, about our family, about this house, and most importantly about the garden. You will not understand everything now. But you must begin where I did. In the greenhouse. Trust what you find there. No signature. Just that. Evelyn stared at the page, her heart pounding. Her grandmother had been a quiet woman, private and precise. The sort to bake a pie for a neighbor and never speak of the war. Secrets didn't belong in her world. Or so Evelyn had thought. Clutching the letter, she made her way downstairs. The house creaked in protest as if waking from slumber. The greenhouse stood at the far end of the garden, glass panes streaked with grime, ivy curled like fingers across the door. Evelyn hesitated at the threshold. What could possibly be waiting for her there? And why did her grandmother keep it hidden? The door groaned as Evelyn pushed it open. A breath of stale air escaped from the greenhouse like the exhale of something long asleep. She stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the filtered light. The glass panes above were clouded with age, dappled with moss and cobwebs. Ivy had crept through cracks in the wall, curling around the metal frames like veins on ancient bones. It was humid inside, unnaturally so, as if the air hadn't changed in years. The scent of damp earth and forgotten summers filled her lungs. Rows of planters, some still housing withered stalks and brittle leaves, lined the walls. In the center stood a small wooden bench, beside which sat a battered watering can and a cracked terracotta pot sprouting a single, thriving violet. Evelyn furrowed her brow. The plant looked too alive for a space so neglected. On the bench lay another envelope, smaller than the one in the attic. Her name was once again scrawled across it. She opened it with fingers that were already trembling. You found it, good. This place has more life than it shows. The garden isn't just a garden. It remembers. It speaks, if you know how to listen. Look beneath the soil. The past is buried there. No signature again. Just a faint scent of lavender clinging to the paper. A shiver crept up Evelyn's spine. She glanced around. Something about the air felt thick, like 1,000 whispered stories trapped between the panes. She kneeled beside the bench, brushing soil aside from one of the garden beds. Her fingers grazed something. Not a root, not stone. Wood. She dug deeper, revealing a small box. This one wasn't rusted, but carved with initials. A.W. Her grandmother's. Inside was a locket and a black and white photograph. A young woman in a nurse's uniform, standing beside a man in military fatigues. Both smiled, though their eyes told different stories. Hers filled with light, his shadowed by something unseen. Tucked behind the photo was a folded newspaper clipping. Local nurse acquitted in mysterious hospital fire, 1947. Evelyn blinked. Her grandmother had always claimed she worked as a midwife in the post-war years. Nothing about a fire. Nothing about a trial. The air in the greenhouse suddenly shifted, cooler against her skin. A pane above her creaked, and for a moment, she swore she heard the faintest rustle, like footsteps on gravel outside. She turned. No one. Yet she didn't feel alone. Heart pounding, she clutched the photo and box, standing up quickly. She needed to know more. This wasn't just family history. It was a mystery long buried, one her grandmother had hidden inside this silent, green-breathed world. Outside, the sky had turned a deeper gray. Evening approached. As she stepped out, She noticed a trail of fresh footprints in the dew-soft grass, leading not toward the house, but deeper into the back garden. They weren't hers. Evelyn followed the trail, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The footprints led her past the forgotten vegetable patch and down a narrow path flanked by overgrown hedges. At the end of the path stood an enormous oak tree, its trunk thick with age, bark twisted like clenched fists. Its branches loomed above her, casting long skeletal shadows in the fading light. She had seen this tree before. It was always there in the corner of her childhood memories, standing sentry at the far edge of the garden. But now it felt different. Older. Wiser. And somehow watchful. At its base, partially hidden under moss and wild mushrooms, lay a weathered stone slab. Not a grave, Evelyn realized, but a makeshift bench or perhaps a marker of some kind. She brushed it clean with her sleeve and found another note, protected in a rusted tin. She waited here, every day after the war. He promised he'd return. When he didn't, something inside her shattered. Look beneath the oak's roots. You'll find the truth she never spoke aloud. The ground beneath the tree was uneven, bulging slightly as if something had been buried and forgotten. She hesitated, then began to dig with her hands, the earth damp and cold. After several minutes, her fingers struck something solid. She uncovered a small metal box, blackened with age, its lock rusted through. Inside were delicate items, an old lace glove, a blood-stained handkerchief, and a letter, yellowed with time. Evelyn read it carefully. Dearest Alice, they say I won't return, that the infection has spread too far. But I cannot leave this world without saying I'm sorry. Not just for leaving, but for the fire. I never meant to hurt you. I thought destroying the records would protect you. Forgive me. Thomas. Her breath caught. Thomas. The man in the photograph. The soldier. And the fire. The hospital fire from the clipping. She sat down heavily on the stone slab. Pieces of the puzzle were beginning to emerge, but they didn't quite fit. Why would her grandmother cover up a fire? And who was Thomas really to her? As the last light of day began to fade, Evelyn heard the wind pick up. But it wasn't just rustling leaves this time. There were voices, faint, layered, like memories rising from the roots. A woman's sob. A man's broken whisper. A child's laugh. And then one clear voice. A woman's. You're closer now, Evelyn. Keep going. Evelyn spun around. No one was there. The wind settled. The tree stood silent once more. Clutching the letter and box, she rose, her mind spinning. She needed to return to the house. She needed warmth and light, and perhaps one more letter to guide her next step. But as she turned to go, she noticed something else carved into the bark of the tree, fresh and clean against the old rough surface. Forgive me. The same words as the letter. And they hadn't been there before. Back inside the house, Evelyn lit every lamp she could find. Shadows crept across the walls like lingering ghosts, but the light pushed them back, at least for now. She placed the metal box, the glove, and the letter carefully on the parlor table. The fire in the grate crackled weakly, doing little to cut through the deepening chill that had settled over the house. It wasn't just the cold of weather. It was the kind that came from old memories reawakening. She reached again into the satchel and pulled out another envelope. This one was marked in a familiar, feminine hand. To be opened only if the oak tree speaks to you. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid the note free. Evelyn, if you found the tree, then the house has shown you the beginning of my truth. Thomas was your great-uncle. We kept his existence hidden for reasons that only made sense in another era. He was brilliant but troubled, and his return from the war broke him further. One night, he came to the sanatorium. The storm was heavy, and I had patients to tend to. He was soaked, shivering, and muttering nonsense, about files, about betrayal, about fire. I tried to calm him, but something snapped. The flames were fast. I saved who I could. But not all. I let them believe it was an accident. And I never told anyone about him again. Forgive me. Agnes. Agnes. Her grandmother. Evelyn sat in silence, the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. So that was it. The story her family never spoke of. Her great-uncle, buried by time and guilt. A fire that had taken lives. A silence paid for in grief. But something didn't sit right. She looked again at the glove. It was far too small for a man's hand. And the lace. Delicate. Feminine. She turned it over and noticed stitching inside the wrist. A.L. Not Thomas. Alice. The woman from the letters. Evelyn stood up abruptly, her breath sharp. Her grandmother hadn't been writing about herself. The letters, the guilt, the secrets, they belonged to someone else. Someone who had been erased. She ran upstairs to the attic once more, driven now not by curiosity, but by urgency. Dust danced in the torchlight as she flung open old trunks and boxes. There, at the back, she found a bundle wrapped in a faded floral quilt. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. 2 women, arms linked, smiling in a garden. A nurse's uniform. A soldier's coat. A hospital room. And then the same oak tree, younger, its roots not yet twisted. And in the margin of one photo, Alice and Agnes, 1947. Our secret world. Her heart pounded. Agnes and Alice. Lovers? Why had no one ever mentioned Alice? Why was her presence completely erased from every family record? She felt sick. Evelyn rifled through the rest of the photos until she found one more envelope, brittle with age. For the one who asks the right questions. Inside was a short letter. They made us hide. In life and in death. I was the one who lit the fire. Not to harm but to protect. I destroyed the papers before they could take Agnes away. They would have called her unstable, for loving me. I thought I was saving her. Instead I doomed us both. They said it was an accident. But I knew better. I never stopped watching. Not from the tree. Not from the house. Love. Alice. Evelyn couldn't move. The room, the air, the house. Everything had changed. The haunting, the letters, the whispering. It wasn't grief or vengeance that lingered here. It was love. Tragic. Buried. Forgotten. And now finally remembered. But not forgiven. Not yet. Morning in Dorset came grey and slow. Mist clung to the windows, softening the edges of the world beyond. Evelyn hadn't slept. She had spent the night in the parlor, the fire long gone cold, the letters and photos laid out before her like puzzle pieces from someone else's life. She now knew the truth. Or part of it. Alice and Agnes. 2 women in love, hidden behind locked doors and silent sacrifices. One declared mad by society, the other erased by fire and fear. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet. There were still pieces missing. Still voices she hadn't heard. The air in the house had changed again. It no longer felt hostile, but it wasn't quite peaceful either. There was a hum beneath the silence, like something waiting. Evelyn needed clarity. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath her boots as she walked to the back garden. The frost had melted into dew, and the air was thick with that peculiar scent of damp stone and old earth. She followed the path past the abandoned greenhouse, its glass panes fogged and fractured, until she reached the rear edge of the property, where the stone garden lay. Dozens of markers. Some tilted, some worn blank with time. No names, just dates. 1948. 1949. So many clustered around that fateful year. She knelt before a moss-covered stone that bore no inscription at all, just a single engraving, a small oak leaf. Suddenly, a breeze stirred. No, not just a breeze. A whisper. Her name. Evelyn. She turned quickly. No one. Then it came again. Soft, sad, and unmistakable. From below the ground, from the stone, from the earth itself. Find her. It wasn't the voice of a woman she recognized. It was younger, raw with grief. Alice. Evelyn pressed her hand to the stone. It was icy. Beneath the moss, she could just make out more etchings. She reached into her coat for a cloth and began rubbing gently. Slowly, letters emerged. A.L. Beloved. Forgotten. Returned. Her breath caught. She stood up and turned to look back at the house. The top window in the attic. It was fogged. But there, a shape. Not menacing. Not angry. Just watching. She didn't run this time. She walked slowly back inside and made her way straight to the cellar, the only place she hadn't dared enter since arriving. The door creaked open. A flight of stone steps descended into darkness. Evelyn clicked on her torch and began to climb down. The air was thick, old, heavy with rot and mildew. Walls lined with shelves of preserves and old bottles, dust-covered relics of a life long ended. But at the far end, a door. Not wood. Metal. Rusted and bolted. She hesitated, then slowly turned the handle. The room inside was small, windowless, but its walls were covered in papers, clippings, letters, photographs. Someone had built a shrine, or a record. Evelyn stepped in and let her torch beam trace across the faces in the photos. Agnes, Alice, patients, nurses. And in the center, a newspaper article pinned with a rusted blade. Sanatorium fire. No explanation for origins. Head nurse resigns. Below, written in trembling ink. They said I was mad. They said love was a disease. I burned it down to stop them. But the fire never stopped. Evelyn felt the weight of it all. Not just secrets. Wounds. Unhealed. Unspoken. This house, this land, the very stones beneath her feet, they had absorbed the pain of those forgotten souls. And they had waited. Waited for someone who would listen. Who would not run. She turned and saw a mirror tucked behind the shelves. Cracked. Covered in soot. In it, for a flicker of a second, she saw her reflection shift. Her eyes not her own. Agnes? Or Alice? The image faded. But the message remained. You carry our story now. The cellar door creaked shut behind her as Evelyn stepped deeper into the room, her torch's glow flickering across the papered walls. Each document told a fragment of a much larger story. One stitched together not with ink, but pain. The more she read, the more she understood. This place wasn't merely haunted by ghosts, but by injustice. She picked up a crumbling notebook from the shelf. The cover was marked simply, A.W., 1948. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The pages were covered in handwriting. Rushed, frantic, at times nearly illegible. They said I was hysterical when I cried. That I was confused when I kissed her. They sent me away from the gardens and locked me in the ward. When I asked for her, they drugged me. When I begged to see her, they strapped me to the bed. I was not sick. I was in love. A shudder ran down Evelyn's spine. Alice had never been unstable. She had been punished for loving the wrong person in the wrong time. Evelyn's heart ached for her, and for Agnes, who had likely spent her days pretending to be strong for both of them. Suddenly, a loud creak sounded above her. Floorboards shifting in the parlor. She froze. This wasn't the moan of the old house settling. These footsteps were measured, deliberate. Someone was upstairs. She doused the torch and held her breath, retreating silently into the shadows. A faint glow came down the stairwell. A lantern or a candle. Then a voice. An old woman's voice, but strong and clear. You shouldn't have come here, Evelyn. The name dropped like ice down her spine. She recognized it. It was the same voice from the audio she had heard on the recorder days ago. Evelyn stayed silent, clutching the notebook. The voice continued, calm but steely. Some truths do not belong in the daylight. They are buried because they must be. A shape appeared at the foot of the stairs. A woman. Pale, hair pulled back into a severe bun, wearing a dress that seemed to belong to another century. She looked familiar. Agnes. Evelyn whispered, more out of instinct than certainty. The woman tilted her head. No, she said. I am what remains of her. The figure stepped forward, and Evelyn saw that the woman wasn't quite real. Her feet didn't touch the ground. Her outline wavered slightly, like heat above pavement. Not flesh and blood. A memory. You read her words, the figure said. But did you feel them? Evelyn opened the notebook. I did. I do. The woman's form flickered. Then you understand why I did what I did. Why I let the fire take it all. I had no choice. There's always a choice, Evelyn said quietly. Not for women like us, the apparition answered. Not in 1948. We could either disappear, or be erased. I chose fire. Silence settled between them. And then the ghost smiled. Sad. Weary. But someone always survives. Someone always finds the ashes. The room around Evelyn grew colder. Papers fluttered. Wind howled through cracks that hadn't been there before. You brought the truth back into the house, the ghost said, stepping backward. Now it cannot rest. Evelyn watched as the figure faded into the walls, swallowed by time. Then with a great snap, the room's air shifted, a sudden weight pressing down on everything. The papers began to burn. One by one, the documents on the wall caught fire. No spark, no flame. Just heat and smoke, blooming in silence. Evelyn gasped and rushed to the notebook, clutching it to her chest. The flames licked the edges of the shelves, consuming decades of silence in seconds. She turned and ran, feet pounding up the stone stairs, smoke following fast behind. She barely made it to the cellar door before the heat pressed at her back. Once upstairs, she collapsed against the door and coughed, her eyes stinging. The house was no longer quiet. It groaned, shifted, breathed. It had waited too long. And now it wanted to be heard. All of it. Evelyn stumbled into the hallway and looked up the staircase. The attic door creaked open slowly. On its own. The attic door gaped open like a mouth caught mid-scream. A cold draft slipped down the stairs, brushing Evelyn's skin like icy fingertips. Her heart pounded in her chest, louder than the creaking of the old floorboards as she took her first step upward. She clutched the notebook tightly. It felt heavier now, as if the truth it contained had weight, had consequence. Each stair moaned beneath her, but she did not turn back. The attic was dimly lit by moonlight seeping through the crooked window. Dust danced in the air, stirred by her breath and the house's size. And then, just as she reached the top, she saw it. A trunk. Old, leather-bound, and cracked by time. It sat in the middle of the attic like a silent sentinel. Evelyn hesitated. Something about it felt sacred. Cursed. Both. She crouched beside it and brushed off the thick layer of dust, revealing initials burned into the lid. A.W. Alice Winford. Her breath caught. She unlatched the trunk. The hinges protested with a groan, and the scent of time, of must and grief, rose from within. Inside lay a trove of letters, photographs, and a folded dress, delicate and yellowed with age. Evelyn reached for the topmost letter. The envelope was sealed with wax, the emblem faded. She opened it carefully. To the one who finds this, know that love lived here. That was all it said. No signature. No date. Just a declaration left behind like a sigh. Underneath, she found photographs, black and white, soft-edged. 2 women in the garden. One laughing. One watching. Their eyes told stories no history book could ever print. And yet, they had been erased, both from memory and from record. The last item in the trunk was a small, velvet box. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, 2 rings. Simple. Matching. Worn smooth from wear. A lump formed in her throat. These weren't mere trinkets. They were promises. They were futures denied. The attic grew still. And then, a whisper. Not a voice. A memory. I waited. And she never came. The words floated through the beams like smoke, settling into her bones. I wrote to her. Every day. Evelyn turned slowly. In the corner of the attic, illuminated faintly by moonlight, was the shadow of a young woman, seated at a small desk, pen in hand, unmoving. Alice. She didn't look up. Her hand hovered above the page, poised mid-letter. I told her I would wait. But they never delivered my letters. Evelyn stepped forward. She waited too, she said softly. The ghost's head turned, slowly, eyes shining with sorrow. She thought you forgot. A crack formed across the floorboards, sudden and loud. The house moaned, as though protesting the truth being spoken aloud after so long. The ghost rose. She died thinking I abandoned her. No, Evelyn said. She died loving you. The spirit's form flickered. Is that why you came? To tell me this? I came to find the truth. But maybe I was meant to bring peace. Alice looked down at her hand, the pen, and then at the box Evelyn held open. Her eyes welled with spectral tears. I wore mine until the very end, Evelyn said. I never took mine off, the ghost whispered. The attic windows shuddered. The light shifted. And then, for the first time since Evelyn arrived, silence fell. Warm silence. The figure at the desk smiled, faint and flickering. Then, like the last page of a book fluttering closed, she vanished, leaving only the faintest scent of roses behind. Evelyn sank to her knees, overwhelmed. She wasn't just uncovering history. She was giving voice to the silenced. And the house had begun to breathe easier. But just as she began to gather the trunk's contents, her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. You shouldn't have opened that. We're watching. Her blood turned to ice. The attic door slammed shut behind her. Evelyn stood frozen, her breath shallow. The attic door had slammed shut with such force it echoed like a gunshot. The message still glowed on her phone screen. You shouldn't have opened that. We're watching. The weight of what she had uncovered, the rings, the letters, the ghost of Alice Winford, suddenly felt like more than history. It felt like danger. She tried the door. Locked. Or worse, jammed by unseen hands. The shadows in the attic pressed closer now. Not just quiet, but listening. Watching. Her fingers trembled as she opened the notebook again, flipping past the entries she'd read. Then she saw a page she hadn't noticed before. The handwriting was different. Hastier. As though scrawled in a rush. If you're reading this, it means you found the trunk. It means you've stirred the past. They never wanted the truth known. They erased us. Buried us beneath ash and silence. But the house remembers. It was signed simply. E.W. Evelyn Winford. Her own name. She blinked. Heart racing. Was it a coincidence? A cruel trick of fate? Or was there more to her connection to the manor than she ever imagined? Suddenly, she heard movement below. Not creaking. Not the usual moans of the old house. Footsteps. Deliberate. Heavy. She backed away from the attic door. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Leave the house. Now. No sender. No number. She raced to the attic window and yanked it open. Cold night air rushed in, biting her skin. Far below, the gravel drive was still. Her car, parked awkwardly beneath the old oak, stood as her only hope. Evelyn didn't think. She climbed out the window, onto the sloped rooftop. Her shoes scraped against the wet tiles. One slip, and she would tumble 2 stories down. But she couldn't stay. Behind her, the attic window slammed shut again, by itself. She reached the edge of the roof and lowered herself onto the drain pipe. It groaned beneath her weight, but held. As her feet hit the ground, she bolted. Into the car. Keys in ignition. Engine stuttering, once, twice, then roaring to life. She didn't look back. Couldn't. The manor shrank in her rearview mirror as she tore down the gravel path, heart pounding like a war drum. When she finally reached the village, Evelyn pulled into the first lit place she found, a petrol station. Inside, she collapsed into a chair by the counter, pale and shaking. The clerk looked up. You all right, love? You look like you've seen a ghost. She nearly laughed. She had. But it wasn't just the ghost of a woman in a faded dress. It was the ghost of a legacy buried deep in her own blood. She opened the notebook again. The last page had changed. New writing appeared, as if inked by invisible hands. Thank you. We remember now. She stared at the words. Then slowly, almost reverently, closed the cover. That night, she checked into a hotel under a different name. Burned the SIM card. Packed only the essentials. She would never go back to that house. But the house might not be done with her.